Silas Vane was no typical supervisor. He sat across from the new employee in the cramped office, where the heavy scent of disinfectant clashed with the faint, smoldering aroma of incense. The halogen desk lamp cast harsh shadows on his face, carving deep, hollow trenches beneath his cold, weary eyes. He did not smile. "Let me be perfectly clear from the start," Silas began, his voice dry, like the tearing of old paper. "That document you signed 3 days ago? It wasn't an employment contract. It was an oath of office. You did not agree to mop a cinema floor. You agreed to become an anchor." Silas slid an old clock closer to the new hire. The hour hand had just passed the 12. "We now enter the hour of schism. This is your shift, and it is named for a simple reason. At midnight, the veil separating reality and the void is drawn so thin it is almost invisible. Our world and the other worlds overlap. For normal people, it is merely the silence of the night. For us, it is when the wolves begin to smell the blood." The Aetherium Grand, Silas continued, was not an entertainment venue. It is a structure built in defiance of collapse. It is an intricate ceiling construct erected to contain a cosmic tear that opened directly beneath this theater, something we call the aperture. Your task is not to clean popcorn, but to maintain the integrity of the sealing ritual performed when this building was erected. He leaned forward, his gaze as sharp as a dagger. The wiring grid, the ventilation system, the very vibration of the floor, they are all part of the ritual. If you fail to follow a specific rule, it isn't merely disappointing the boss. It is creating a fissure in the protective ward. Silas revealed the true nature of the midnight clientele. The people you will encounter are not film enthusiasts. We call them the inhabitants, entities from other dimensions seeking to use the hour of schism to cross through the aperture. They take many forms. Some are like shadows, some are like malignant concepts, and some wear the guise of human skin. The conversation turned personal. "Why this specific new employee? We didn't hire you based on your resume or customer service skills. We hired you for your spectral compatibility, because your spiritual frequency strangely aligns with the frequency the theater emits. You were chosen because you are a conduit. You were predestined to stand in this position. And that brings us back to the oath." Silas picked up the copy of the contract, flipping to the final page. Though the black ink on the paper appeared normal, at the very bottom, where the new employee had signed, there was a faint red smear, like an ancient thumbprint. "This isn't dried ink, it's blood. This is a blood pact binding you to the guardianship of this particular corner of hell. This covenant has no cancellation clause. You have delivered yourself to this theater, and now, you must learn to sustain its life, and your own." To understand the rules of survival, Silas stated, the new hire had to understand the roots of the horror they guarded. He began the story of Valerius. The Aetherium Grand was built in the 1930s, an age where superstition and fanaticism were hidden beneath a glossy veneer of modernism. Its architect and sole proprietor, Mr. Valerius, was not a real estate developer. He was a high priest of chaos. Silas explained that the cinema was not just built on a nexus of energy. It was built with violence. Valerius performed sacrifices, not just animals, but associates, investors, and experienced builders. He believed that to open the gate, the construction materials had to be saturated with human spirit. The cement you walk on is not merely limestone. It is ashes and crushed will. Valerius's madness was encoded directly into the design. Silas gestured toward the grand, yet oppressive lobby. "Look at Screening Room 1, the main auditorium. It has exactly 666 seats. This is not an aesthetic coincidence. It is Valerius's horrific irony against the human soul. Each seat is a potential trap, designed to contain and absorb the audience's vitality, using their energy to continue widening the aperture." The climax of Valerius's frenzy occurred on the night the theater opened. His final film was not fiction. It was a true recording of his own final hysteria and death. He sat in seat number 666 and ended his own life right there on screen, turning his demise into the ultimate rite, a supreme offering to the things he worshipped on the other side of the aperture. The most terrifying thing, however, Silas warned, was that Valerius did not truly die. In the inquest report that year, they concluded accident or suicide. They were wrong. Valerius had orchestrated everything. He became a part of the architecture. He dissolved his soul and will into the walls, the ventilation pipes, the electrical circuits. The Aetherium Grand is not a haunted building. It is Valerius. He is a living entity, a form of architectural sentience, desperate to continue his opening ritual through whoever holds the keys, through new caretakers like you. Silas concluded this segment with a chilling caution. When you think you are doing maintenance, you are walking through the veins of a dead madman. When you hear the moaning of the pipes, that may be Valerius whispering. He wants you to fail, but he also needs you. Because if you do not maintain the seal, he will collapse along with the theater. But he is always looking for a replacement to continue the rite. The first covenant, the threshold covenant, is the most crucial for guarding the theater against designated external threats. This job begins at the ticket counter. Silas indicated an antique cash register on the desk. As I said, the 666 tickets sold are all countdown tickets. They carry an energetic charge. Most patrons are harmless sheep, souls that can be swayed by Valerius but pose no direct threat to the seal. But there is one exception. Silas produced a worn, old ticket stub, number 032, printed in faded red ink. You must pay specific attention to this ticket number, known as the void mark. If a customer draws ticket 032, it is not coincidence. This is the designated offering, chosen not by us, but by the cinema itself, by Valerius, to cause instability. He explained the dangerous nature of the void mark bearer. The 032 bearer possesses an anti-ritual energy. They are not an inhabitant, but their presence, even if they are unaware, will immediately thin the theater's defensive layer. They are like a pin pricking the protective bubble. The moment they cross the main threshold, a large portion of the ward protecting the theater will shatter, allowing high-level inhabitants to flood in rapidly. The rule for survival here is absolute and uncompromising. Under no circumstances must the bearer of ticket 032 cross the main entrance. You must use any means necessary to stop them. Lie that the screening is canceled, that the projector is broken, that their ticket is fraudulent. If they persist, threaten them. If necessary, use minor physical force, shove them off the front steps. You may injure them slightly, but they are absolutely forbidden from entering. It is a necessary sacrifice. Silas placed heavy emphasis on the consequences of failure. Suppose you fail. Suppose the 032 bearer slips past you and enters the lobby, heading towards the stairs. You must immediately withdraw. Do not attempt to intervene. Do not attempt to save them. In that moment, they are no longer a person. They are a timed bomb. You must consider them dead, because attempting to approach them will only ensure you are also swallowed when the collapse occurs. An attempt at human intervention will trigger a full release of the inhabitants, spreading disaster not just in this cinema, but throughout the city. Rule 032 is the first and final rule of external defense. Better to lose one innocent soul than to lose control of this world, Silas stressed. With the main entrance secured, the new employee must confront the internal threats, where Valerius can manipulate matter and consciousness. Screening Room 1 is the heart of the aperture, Silas instructed. Before every midnight show, you must perform a simple, yet vital, ritual. He produced a specialized beeswax candle, soaked in an oil that emitted a faint, sulfuric odor. This is the living flame. It is not merely a candle. It is a conduit for sealing energy. You must place it in the small wall niche next to the projector in Screening Room 1 and light it before the patrons begin to enter. This flame creates a thin but effective psychic barrier, making it harder for Valerius to harvest souls. The flame serves a specific purpose, repelling the crystalline specters. These are creatures that are clear, airy, but shaped like fractured glass. They do not feed on flesh. They feed on sanity and reason. They weave themselves into the minds of the audience, turning fear into hysteria, and seek to possess their bodies to use them as vessels for escape. They are craving human vessels. Silas's warning shifted to emergency protocol. If, mid-screening, the living flame is extinguished, it is not a draft. It is the sign that the crystal inspectors have successfully infiltrated and have begun the process of audience possession. You will hear screams, stomping, or worse, complete silence. In that event, Silas's voice dropped to a cold command. You must act with absolute ruthlessness. Slam the door of screening room 1 shut, lock it tightly from the outside, and absolutely never, ever open it again, regardless of the pleas or cries you hear. Those souls are lost. Opening the door only releases the possessing entities. Sacrificing that chamber is necessary to preserve the greater seal. Regarding the third covenant, Silas pointed to a corner of the desk where nothing Saturday. This is the greatest psychic danger, and it does not follow a schedule. He warned of the spontaneous appearance of the sanguine real. It will appear, perhaps tonight, perhaps tomorrow night, on the desk, in a cupboard, or right on the chair you are sitting in. It is an old, heavy film reel that appears to be bleeding from within. It is not a haunted object. It is a spontaneous psychic entity, a living fragment of Valerius's consciousness. This reel cannot be destroyed. It is the embodiment of madness. It constantly seeks someone to project it. If it is screened, Valerius's fanaticism will spread exponentially to the outside world, compelling thousands to participate in his self-destructive ritual. The simple but vital rule: never touch it. Never open the canister. Most importantly, never let it know you see it. If you glance at it and think, ugh, what is that disgusting reel? You have created a connection. You must treat it like air. View it as an illusion, a sleeping serpent on your workstation. Walk around it, do your job, and wait until the hour of schism ends. It will vanish before dawn. If it is there, you must convince yourself it does not exist. Silas leaned back in his chair, the coldness in his eyes unwavering. Now you know the rules of engagement. I assume you want to ask about resignation, about your salary, or about your next day off. He shook his head. None of those questions are relevant anymore. These rules are not management guidelines. They are the terms of an irrevocable covenant. You stepped into the shadow, and the shadow closed behind you. Silas emphasized the permanence of the agreement. You cannot leave. This theater chose you. If you attempt to run, you will not just lose your job. The blood pact will reverse. The sealing energy will recognize you as an impediment, and Valerius himself will dismantle you piece by piece, turning you into new construction material. You will become the material for seat 667. Every act of compliance, according to Silas, is a step towards strengthening the seal, helping protect the world. Every breach will lead to personal collapse, the release of inhabitants, and cosmic catastrophe. Silas stood up, a slow, weary movement. He clapped the new employee lightly on the shoulder, his touch cold and heavy. You have officially joined the defense force of the Aetherium Grand. There is no turning back. Keep the living flame lit. Watch for ticket 032, and forget the sanguine reel exists. He concluded with a welcome that felt more like a curse, ushering the new hire out of the office and toward the flickering neon lights of the lobby. Welcome to the shift. Remember, you don't just work at the theater. You are now part of the film. The moment Silas Vane concluded his curse disguised as an orientation, an icy blast from the cinema's basement engulfed the new employee, a chill that was not merely thermal, but the stark realization of a new reality. The wall clock, already warped, its second hand seemingly stuttering backward slightly, struck precisely 12 a.m. The divide hour had begun. The Aetherium Grand was no longer a movie theater. It was a living entity, ravenous and repulsive. The stale smell of old popcorn and damp carpet was now overlaid by ozone, ancient brass, and a dry, metallic odor like petrified blood. Every flickering bulb cast distorted reflections of the new hire on the granite floor, a surface Valerius had paved with sacrificial offerings. The employees' hands trembled as they gripped the heavy bronze key, the key to screening room 1, where the living flame had to be lit. They felt not just one pair of eyes watching, but thousands. Valerius had dissolved into the architecture, And now every ventilation duct, every creaking floorboard, was a sense organ, monitoring whether the new gatekeeper would accept their role as the final sacrifice. The employment contract, now an indelible blood pact, burned a hole in their consciousness, reminding them that resignation meant willingly offering their soul to the denizens. Their first and most perilous task was to manage the box office for the midnight showing. The midnight screening attracted neither drunks nor lovers. The patrons who came to the Aetherium Grand at this hour were people bearing mysterious burdens, sleepwalkers drawn unwittingly by the anti-ritualistic energy emanating from the threshold. They were not buying tickets to a film. They were purchasing seats on a one-way train to the nether. The employee sat behind the counter, performing each ticket transaction with harrowing care. They held their breath every time a ticket spool rolled out of the machine. 666 tickets, 666 potential souls. The number 032 was the void mark. After 20 tense minutes, it happened. A young woman, plainly dressed with distracted eyes, approached. As the printer whirred, the employee looked down. On the flimsy gray paper, the number displayed was 032. The employee's body instantly froze. This was the chosen offering. Her presence at the theater's threshold would instantly weaken the seal, just as Silas had warned. Instinct urged them to flee or warn the girl, but Valerius's petrified will, a sensation like a cold hand tightening around their chest, forced compliance with the covenant. "I'm sorry," the employee said, their voice dry. "The machine is malfunctioning." The girl tilted her head, confused. "My ticket." "This ticket," the employee struggled to maintain composure. "It's a duplicate print, a system error perhaps. We can't honor it." They reached out, trying to snatch back the 032 stub. "No, I must have this one." The girl suddenly became strangely strong, her voice taking on a low, non-human resonance. She clutched the ticket tightly, as if it were a life raft rather than a death sentence. Clearly, Valerius was using the cinema's own desperate hunger to pull her inside. The employee understood. Lying would not work. They resorted to quick, cold violence, acting swiftly according to Silas's instructions. They stood up, placed their hand on the girl's shoulder, and pushed her definitively back across the threshold, out into the cold night rain. "We are sold out," they lied. "Go now? There is no showing for you tonight." The girl stared, her eyes briefly flickering with deep disappointment. Or was it the disappointment of an entity inside the theater? Finally, she turned and walked away into the rain, the 032 ticket crumpled in her hand. The employee stumbled back to the counter. They had succeeded, but at the cost of their own humanity. They had shoved an innocent person out of shelter or confinement, into the darkness, to preserve a terrible seal. The crushing guilt was suppressed, replaced by a cold emptiness, a sign that the covenant was beginning to consume them. With 665 patrons safely, for now, seated, the employee proceeded to screening room 1. This was the heart of the sealing ritual. The large room, decorated with cryptic symbols they now knew to be magical carvings, reeked of acrid incense mixed with a faint sulphurous odor. They found the living flame on a small stone pedestal hidden behind the screen, out of sight of the audience. It was a massive, black wax candle, placed next to a jug of thick, amber liquid called seal oil. The employees' hands trembled as they performed the ritual, pouring the oil onto the candle, lighting the wick. The flame ignited with a sickly blue light, not the usual warm yellow, and immediately, the room seemed to sigh in relief. The psychic barrier had been erected. They began patrolling the aisles between the rows of seats. The audience was watching an old, nonsensical film, but the crystalline entities didn't care about content. They were attracted by the emptiness of the human mind, seeking an unoccupied brain to inhabit. Walking toward row 4, the employee sensed a change. The temperature dropped sharply. They could not see the crystalline entities, they were transparent, but they could feel their pressure, as if the air had grown dense and sharp, like fractured quartz. They looked at the living flame. It was dancing wildly, its blue light weak. A patron in row 5, a middle-aged man, began to mutter. At first, It was the normal mumble of someone falling asleep. But then, it shifted into dry, cracking sounds, like stone being ground to dust, utterly inhuman. The man's eyes snapped open, but his pupils were covered by a film of solid, white mist, like agate. The incursion. The living flame began to wane, the wick sinking into the black wax pool. The employee felt extreme panic. If the flame died, dozens of patrons would become vessels for the crystalline entities. Covenant 2 resonated in their mind, cold and unforgiving. Slam the door shut, lock it, and ignore the screams. They took a step back, reaching for the key. The safety of 664 souls depended on sacrificing the 2 souls already possessed. But just as they prepared to bolt for the door, the living flame flared up powerfully once more. For reasons unknown, perhaps the seal oil retained just enough potency. The fire stabilized itself. It wasn't burning brilliantly, but it held steady at a sputtering level. The man in row 5 gave a soft groan, the white mist in his eyes faded, and he slumped back, asleep. The employees stood there, cold sweat slicking their skin. They had stood on the precipice of the greatest transgression, ready to condemn the innocent. That they didn't have to act this time was not a salvation, but a postponement. Upon returning to the workstation, the feeling of Valerius watching grew heavier. The air was still, as if before a lightning strike. They looked down at the counter and saw it. The sanguine 13th reel. It was not a normal film canister. It was held in an unlabeled metal box, its surface covered in a thin layer of rust, yet it immediately radiated an unnatural coldness. It sat squarely on the notepad, with absolutely no indication that anyone had placed it there. It simply was. It was not a haunted object. It was a fragment of Valerius, the living consciousness of the zealot, condensed into cinematic material. The temptation was immediate. A voice whispered, not sound, but a cold idea leaking into the mind, urging the employee to open it. Just a glance. Screen it, to understand purpose. This was Valerius's voice, craving the spread of his psychological contagion. The employee remembered Silas's terrifying warning. Never touch it. Never open the canister. Most importantly, do not let it know you see it. They had to practice absolute denial, a colossal act of will. With all their mental strength, they forced themselves to look through the sanguine 13th reel. It did not exist. It was merely a hole in their vision, a pile of scrap metal. They attempted to work, wiping the counter, checking tickets, scribbling nonsense, while the repugnant object lay inches away. They dared not move, fearing that any vibration would be an acknowledgement of the living entity. Time dragged on, each minute an eternity. They could feel the reel waiting. It was patiently probing, trying to find a fissure in their mental defense. They could sense the frenzy, the self-destruction, and the craving for immolation that Valerius had turned into art. Finally, the divide hour began to close, and when the employee blinked, the sanguine 13th reel was gone, just as mysteriously as it had appeared. It had retreated, but had left its mark, a profound sense of disgust, and the knowledge that this threat would always lurk. As the cold, gray light of dawn began to filter through the grimy cinema windows, the divide hour ended. The Aetherium Grand's architecture seemed to sigh, the artificial life receding, and the mundane smell of popcorn and old carpet returned. Silas Vane emerged from the shadow of a corridor, looking refreshed, as if he had drawn energy from the very horror of the night just past. "The shift is over," Silas said, his tone flat. He walked slowly, not looking at the employee's face, but rather staring intently at the walls. "How was the maintenance?" he asked, not inquiring about comfort, but checking the ritual log. The employee took a deep breath, their voice ragged from tension. They recounted mechanically. The bearer of ticket 032 repelled. The living flame wavered but held, and the sanguine 13th reel appeared and vanished. Silas nodded, his approval more chilling than anger. "Good. You did what was required. You fulfilled your first covenant. You chose the safety of the seal over your compassion. That makes you perfect for the job." He paused at the door of screening room 1, where the last showing had ended, the patrons shuffling out somberly. Silas pointed to a single empty seat near the front. I count 664 people leaving, Silas observed, his face expressionless. Tickets sold were 665. Did you notice that? The employee felt their stomach clench. They had been so focused on the living flame and the real that they had missed a lost soul. Perhaps it was the man the crystalline entity almost claimed when the flame wavered, or another chosen one they failed to recognize. It is inevitable, Silas said, reading the horror in the employee's eyes. Not every divide hour is perfect. Every time one soul is consumed, Valerius grows a little stronger. But as long as you hold the seal, the job is adequate. He reached out and patted the employee's shoulder, the touch cold as steel. Welcome to eternal employment, gatekeeper. Go home now, but do not sleep too long. Tomorrow midnight, the divide hour will call you back. Once you accept the covenant, you cannot leave. You are part of the film, and it is a long, endless feature. Silas vanished into the hallway. The employee stood alone in the dreary dawn, no longer an individual, but a function, a sentinel bound to a never-ending cycle of guarding hell. Silas Vane did not permit comfort. His face, weary and etched with lines born not of age but of sleepless nights confronting the unnameable, was tight and severe. He shoved the signed employment contract across the cold steel table. This is not a second job, and I will not repeat myself, Silas stressed, his voice rough as sandpaper. This is an oath of allegiance. Your shift, from midnight until dawn, is what we call the Hour of Schism. He gestured to a wall clock whose second hand seemed to run contrary to the universe's rhythm. It is the time when the curtain separating what you people call reality and the abyss thins. It is not a metaphor. It is spiritual physics. Silas revealed the shocking truth about the workplace. The Aetherium Grand was not a dying art house cinema. It was an intricate containment design, built upon an ancient nexus of spiritual energy. He explained that the screenings, the popcorn, and the worn leather seats were merely the veneer. The real job is not cleaning up after drunkards. Your mission is the maintenance of an archaic ritual. You uphold the seal. In this place, an aperture has been opened, a deep rent from which things that should not exist can bleed through. Your job is to ensure the residents, the invisible, monstrous entities from other dimensions, do not cross, Silas said, staring hard at the new employee, his eyes reflecting the dim light of a flickering neon tube. You thought you were chosen based on work experience? Wrong. You were chosen for some grotesque compatibility with this place, an unseen thread Valerius laid long ago. And that contract you signed? It wasn't an agreement about wages. It is a blood covenant, binding you to this infernal vigil until you have nothing left to offer. Silas picked up a loose brick near the base of the wall and set it down heavily. The hollow, dry sound echoed in the small room. To understand how to maintain the seal, you must understand how it was built and who built it. He delved into the cinema's dark history. The Aetherium Grand was not constructed with standard cement or steel. It was built with ritual sacrifice. Mr. Valerius, the founder and fanatical architect, was no film enthusiast. He was a dark mystic. He believed architecture could become a psychic organ, a trap for consciousness, Silas explained. Valerius had sacrificed his associates and contractors at various stages of construction, not to save costs, but to open the gate and infuse their souls into the very structure. Look at the main screening room, Silas commanded, his voice filled with ancient disgust. Valerius deliberately designed the theater with 666 seats. Not a random number, but a horrific irony directed at the human soul. Every seat is a potential trap, a pedestal for absorption. Everyone who enters is energy for the seal, whether they consent or not. The culmination of Valerius's madness was his final film, a grainy, excised footage of his own frenzy and demise. Everyone believed Valerius died in an accident or construction mishap. Silas gave a humorless scoff. Mistake. He achieved his final goal. He became the architecture. Valerius did not die. He dissolved his soul and will into the walls, the wiring, and the ventilation ducts. This theater is not merely haunted. It is a living entity, craving to continue its opening ritual through new custodians. It is the trap, and it is also Valerius. And it is watching you through every vent. Silas transitioned to the first of the covenants, a set of laws that must be followed without exception. He pulled out a stack of old tickets, mundane in appearance yet radiating an unnerving chill. The selling of tickets is not about profit. It is part of a countdown. The 666 tickets sold are all countdown markers, each representing a potential soul used to maintain the balance, or, if unlucky, an offering. This is the single most critical rule concerning the aperture, Silas warned, sliding a pale gray-blue ticket across the table. Ticket number 032. We call it the void mark. He explained that if a customer drew this ticket, it was not an algorithm printing error. That person had been chosen, not by Silas, not by the day staff, but by the architecture itself, by the conscious will of Valerius living in the walls. They are the designated offering. But there's a difference. Their presence carries an anti-ritualistic energy. They are not sacrificed to strengthen the seal, but disruptive material selected to shatter it. Their arrival at the door will cause our fragile containment to break immediately, opening the floodgates for the residents during the Hour of Schism. The rule was clear, and Silas emphasized every word with cold cruelty. The employee must use any means necessary to prevent that person from stepping through the main doorway. Any means. He listed tactics, his voice devoid of inflection. First, use flies. Theater is closed. Film canceled. System error. If they insist, escalate to threats. Make them feel unsafe. Convince them of danger unrelated to the theater. Say you saw a thief or a violent vagrant near their car. If all else fails and they attempt to pass, you are permitted to use minor force, just enough to turn them away without causing permanent injury. A hard shove, a sudden physical obstruction. Morality does not exist here. Survival is everything. Silas retrieved ticket 032, as if touching it for too long might contaminate him. If you fail, if the bearer of ticket 032 somehow passes your deterrence and enters the lobby, you must immediately retreat. That is the final and most crucial clause. The moment they cross the threshold, the collapse has begun. You must consider them dead and yourself the sole survivor. Attempting to intervene, attempting to save them, will only trigger a greater breakdown, releasing the full complement of residents both within and without. Once the void mark is inside, you are no longer the warden. You are a running mouse. He slipped ticket 032 into his coat pocket. You will have seconds to decide. Compassion is a luxury we cannot afford. The 032 is not Valerius's victim. They are the drill bit chosen by Valerius himself. The dangers ramped up, moving from the external, 032, to the internal, the final two covenants. Silas directed the employee down a narrow corridor leading towards screening room 1, where the greatest spiritual threats resided. This screening room is the epicenter of the seal, Silas explained, pointing to an antique brass lantern situated next to the doorway. Before every midnight screening, you must light the living flame. This fire was fed by a specialized consecrated oil, a mixture concocted over centuries. The fire is not for illumination. It creates a psychic barrier, a high-frequency wall that the eye cannot perceive. Its purpose was to ward off the crystal inspectors. They are translucent, near-air entities. They do not feed on flesh or blood. They corrode the minds and sanity of the audience. They seek to possess human bodies to escape, using them as hosts. If the flame extinguishes mid-screening, Silas said, it is a clear and terrible sign. They have infiltrated. If the living flame goes out, you will hear it. Everything in the theater will become either too silent or too loud. The patrons are no longer patrons. They are the new hosts. In that scenario, the employee must act with absolute brutality. Silas handed a set of rusted keys to the newcomer. You must slam the screening room door shut, locking it from the outside. And you are never permitted to open it again, not if you hear screaming, pleading, or banging. Sacrificing those souls is necessary. You lock the door, and you let them become new building material for the seal. That is their fate, and that is your duty. Silas then led the employee into the small, dusty projectionist booth reserved for the night guard. On a corner shelf sat a rusted metal film canister. This is the greatest psychological danger. This reel, which Valerius directed, continually appears randomly on the night guard's desk. It could be there when you arrive, or it could materialize when your back is turned. It is not a haunted object, Silas whispered, his voice dropping. It is a spontaneous spiritual organism, a living fragment of Valerius's consciousness, materialized from sheer madness. It cannot be destroyed. It is an eternal sliver of the theater. Its goal is to spread Valerius's fanaticism to the world via the projector. The rule was simple but paramount. Do not touch it, ever. Do not open the canister, ever. Most importantly, do not let it know you see it. Silas explained that the Sanguine 13 film reel only holds power when it is acknowledged. If you look at it too long, if you attempt to move it, or if you admit its presence, Valerius's consciousness will lock onto you. You must regard it as air, as a faint smudge on the wall. Treat it like a sleeping viper on your desk. You see it. You know it is there. But it is not there. Forget it. Live with it. Silas stepped back, taking the new employee in from head to toe. His eyes held no sympathy. That is everything you need to know to survive your first shift. Do not ask about resignation or leaving. You have signed an irrevocable covenant within the Hour of Schism. These rules are not guidelines to make the job easier. They are terms. Every rule adhered to is a step towards strengthening the seal, a necessary sacrifice. Every rule broken will lead to personal collapse, and if the failure is large enough, it will result in cosmic catastrophe, the release of the residents, and the doom of this city. He placed a hand on the new employee's shoulder, his touch cold and heavy. You have officially joined the defense force of the Aetherium Grand. There is no turning back. You are bound to the permanent custodianship of this hell, and you will see things that human language cannot express. But you must hold firm, because if you crumble, we all crumble. Silas smiled, a look not of amusement, but of protracted suffering. Welcome to the shift. Remember, you are not just working at the theater. You are now part of the feature. The night gatekeeper, Silas Vane, never began with introductions. He began with a warning. His voice was a low, abrasive rumble, carrying the cold, metallic echo of hallways that never saw the light of day. First, discard every concept you hold about employment. Forget health benefits. Forget hourly wages. You are not an employee. You are a custodial object, and this is not a side gig, Silas stated, tapping the freshly signed contract the new hire had submitted. A flimsy white sheet, yet sealed with an unmistakably bright red, visceral wax seal. This is a vocation, and it is effective perpetually. The new hire's shift, midnight to 6 a.m., Silas designated as the Hour of Schism. He elaborated that this was the precise juncture where the physical order and the spiritual order were thinnest. As the mundane world settled into sleep, the Aetherium Grand began to stir. The Aetherium Grand is not a cinema. It is a sealing mechanism constructed to contain a catastrophic event, Silas continued, his gaze sweeping across the magnificent but deeply shadowed main lobby. Your duty is not sweeping up popcorn. Your duty is ritual maintenance, reinforcing the barrier to keep the aperture from fully tearing open. Behind those velvet curtains, beneath those rows of seats, is a direct hole leading to dimensions where logic and geometry have dissolved. Silas drove home the selection process. The new hire was not chosen for experience or customer service. They were selected for a certain spectral affinity with the venue's darkness. He pointed to the signature on the contract. What you signed is not a work agreement. It is an irrevocable covenant, written in a language even you cannot read. It binds you to the watch. Hell is directly behind the door of Screening Room 1, and you are its assigned warden. Silas led the new hire toward a weathered bronze bust, currently draped under a tattered canvas sheet. He ripped the cloth away, revealing the face of Mr. Valerius, the owner and fanatical architect. The statue's expression held no pride, only a cold lunacy, a terrible craving. That is Valerius. He did not build this cinema with standard brick and mortar. He built it using god blood, Silas spat. He explained that Valerius was no film tycoon. He was a spiritual alchemist, an architect obsessed with merging physical and non-physical space. To open the aperture, Valerius didn't use keys. He used souls, Silas revealed. Valerius sacrificed his associates, investors, and even his own family, absorbing their spiritual energy into the foundations and rebar of the structure. This transformed the cinema into a living energy siphon, a trap designed to draw in entities from the outside. Silas gestured toward the ceiling, where bizarre geometric decorative patterns snaked across the plaster. He deliberately designed this space with 666 seats. That is not an accident. It is a cruel mockery of the human soul. Every seat is a lure. The climax of Valerius's madness was his final film, a genuine reel captured with his own blood and frenzy as he self-immolated. Silas offered a horrifying correction to the persistent legend. Valerius did not die in a mundane fire. No, that is too simple. He completed the ritual. He became the architecture, dissolving his will, his rage, and his fanaticism into the walls, the ventilation shafts, and the electrical systems. This theater is a living organism, and Valerius's soul is its central nervous system. It craves to continue his opening ritual. And you, gatekeeper, are Valerius's new hands. If you fail, you will be the next offering toward the theater's integrity. Silas returned to the ticket counter, where a stack of old paper tickets sat neatly organized. He picked up a sheaf and tore them decisively. The first covenant deals with external control. It involves ticket sales and the necessary sacrifice. Silas explained that every one of the 666 tickets sold serves as a countdown to something. They are not random. They are complex calculations made by the theater to seek out souls with low spiritual frequency, those easily corrupted. However, there is one number you must internalize. It is ticket number 032, Silas said, dropping his voice to a lower, almost conspiratorial whisper. It is called the void mark. This is a counter-ritual number. The holder of ticket 032 is not a patron. They are the designated offering by Valerius himself. Silas explained that the presence of the void mark carrier brings a conflicting energy, a kind of psychic shockwave capable of instantly destabilizing the sealing mechanism protecting the cinema. This is the biggest instability Valerius intentionally coded into the process. The rule regarding ticket 032 is clear and cruel. If you identify this person at the box office or in the lobby, whether a child, an elder, or anyone else, you must use every means necessary to prevent them from passing the main doors. You must act swiftly and without remorse. Silas listed the options. The most ludicrous lie, a direct threat of show cancellation, fabricating technical faults, or even light use of physical force to compel them off the theater property. Remember, you must not inflict grievous injury. Their blood would strengthen the aperture, which we must avoid. Should you fail, Silas paused. Should the carrier of ticket 032 step into the main lobby, you must immediately retreat. You must consider them dead and vacate their screening room's vicinity. Attempting intervention then will only cause a greater collapse, releasing the entire inhabitant population immediately. This is a non-negotiable term. Preserve the theater, even if it means sacrificing a marked soul. Silas guided the new hire backstage near screening room 1, where the air was thick with mildew and old oil. He pointed to a small bronze brazier placed upon a cracked marble pedestal, holding a peculiar, slender candle. This is where the danger escalated from external transactions to internal, nightly spiritual maintenance. We now speak of guarding what has been contained, Silas began. We have the final 2 internal covenants, and they require the ruthlessness and precision of a haunted surgeon. #####Covenant 2. The Living Flame and Crystal Inspectors. Before every midnight screening in room 1, you must perform a small rite. The candle in this brazier is called the Living Flame. It is not made of standard wax. It is a compound of sacrificial human tallow and hallowed oil sealed by ancient sects. The flame's purpose is not illumination, but to create a high frequency, vibrating psychic shield. This flame is the only weapon against a dreadful threat inside the screening room. The crystal inspectors. They are not the ghosts you see in films. They are transparent, nearly invisible objects that exist in an interference state between light and shadow. They specialize in eroding the minds and sanity of the patrons, stripping away their memories and humanity. Imagine them as spiritual worms. They don't want to eat flesh, they want to possess. When they find a sufficiently weak mind, they enter, creating a perfect replacement for the soul. Their ultimate goal is to possess enough bodies to form a convoy that departs the Aetherium Grand, carrying a piece of the aperture out into the world. The living flame is the soul defense. As long as it burns, it emits a kind of spectral heat that repels the crystal inspectors, keeping them outside the screening room seal. If the flame extinguishes, that is not a malfunction. That is a sign they have won, Silas stated, his voice devoid of sympathy. If you see the living flame go out mid-screening, even for a minute, it means at least one, perhaps more, crystal inspectors have breached and are beginning the takeover of the audience. The process is irreversible. In that situation, the employee must act with absolute brutality and zero delay. 1. Slam the door of screening room 1 shut immediately. 2. Lock it tightly from the outside using the emergency mechanical lock, a wrought iron padlock sealed with ancient scripts you will find in the 3rd drawer of my desk. 3. You must never open that door again, under any circumstance, even if you hear screams, pleas, or sounds of desperate knocking. Silas looked the new hire dead in the eye. They are not human then. That is the vessel crying out. Attempting rescue will endanger you and the entire city. The sacrifice of those souls is required to maintain the seal. This is the term of covenant too. The survival of the many is purchased with your silence before the death of the few. Silas led the employee to the small projection booth, a cramped space choked with film dust and old machinery. He pointed to an empty workbench area. This is the warning concerning the greatest psychic danger, and the reminder that Valerius never truly left, he said, gesturing to a corner of the room. The grotesque reel directed by Mr. Valerius occasionally manifests spontaneously. It obeys no physical or logical law. That reel, known as the Sanguine 13 reel, frequently appears without warning on the night watchman's desk. It resides in an old metal canister, which is unusually warm to the touch, and it seems to subtly emit a faint hissing, like breath. Silas maintained, it is not a haunted object. It is a psychic organism born of spontaneous generation, an isolated soul fragment of Valerius condensed into celluloid. The sanguine reel's purpose is to find someone to project it. If projected, it will not simply screen a horror film. It will directly broadcast Valerius's fanaticism, his cosmic terror, and his will to open the aperture into the collective mind of anyone viewing it. Once that will is spread, the Aetherium Grand seal will shatter from the outside. The rule for Covenant 3 is simple, yet demands the stiffest mental discipline you will ever have. Do not touch it. Do not open the canister. Most importantly, do not let it know you see it. The sanguine reel hunts for attention. It will attempt to stimulate your curiosity. It will subtly move when your back is turned. It will leave inexplicable scratches on the desk. It may generate whispered sounds inviting you to discover the final truth. You must treat it as a sleeping serpent on your workstation, and you must pretend you are blind and deaf. Curiosity is its reciprocal covenant, Silas emphasized. If you touch it, Valerius will recognize you. If you stare at it too long, Valerius will begin speaking to you, and he will never fall silent again. If the reel appears, the employee must wait until the hour of schism ends, 6 a.m. Only when the first light of dawn, when spiritual energy is weakest, arrives are they permitted to dispose of it. Using the lead-line tongs kept in my storage locker, you will gently, without looking directly, place the sanguine reel into the iron sepulchre, the lead-sealed safe at the back of the office. Do not lift it too high. Do not let it tremble. Treat it as psychic radiation. And once it is secured, you must forget it exists until the next shift. Silas concluded the training by walking back to the main lobby, where the shadows seemed deeper than ever. He dismissed all unasked questions about leave, resignation, or seeking outside help. "You are thinking about leaving?" Silas observed coldly. "Forget it. These rules are not guidelines to keep your job. They are the terms of an irrevocable covenant. The moment you signed the sheet, you forfeited your freedom to the cause of the Aetherium Grand." He reminded the new hire that the cinema is a proprietary entity. Attempting to run will only lead to a worse death, or a life perpetually hunted by Valerius's agents, who will ensure that the runaway soul becomes structural material for the next rift. Every act of compliance is a step towards strengthening the seal. Every time you fail to handle Ticket 032, or neglect the living flame, or look upon the sanguine real, it is not merely a mistake. It is a betrayal of the covenant, and it will lead to your personal collapse, followed by cosmic disaster. Silas Vane placed a hand on the new hire's shoulder, his touch cold as glacial ice. "You have officially joined the custodial guard of the Aetherium Grand. There is no retreat. You are bound as the perpetual warden to hell, and you will serve until this theater either collapses upon itself, or Valerius decides he no longer requires your soul." Silas withdrew his hand and turned away, his eyes fixed on the deepening gloom of the corridor leading to Screening Room 1. "Welcome to the shift. Remember, you don't just work at the theater. You are now part of the show." Silas leaned against the counter, the flickering neon light from the now showing marquee casting dancing shadows across his cheekbones. He no longer wore the look of a reluctant guide. He was now the executioner. He waited for the inevitable, the unspoken question the new employee surely harbored, the question about the exit. "I know what you are thinking," Silas said, his voice sandpaper dry. "You are calculating. You're thinking of submitting your resignation in the morning, finding a normal office job, or perhaps fleeing this city entirely. Forget it." He held up his index finger, pointing to an old, faint, nearly invisible scar, the schism mark he had alluded to previously. "The contract you signed wasn't an administrative document," Silas explained. "It was an ethereal bind, a tethering mechanism. You weren't chosen randomly. The day you put pen to paper, your soul was marked and calibrated to resonate with the Aetherium's specific vibrational frequency. This theater doesn't hold you with police or lawyers. It holds you with cosmic fundamentalism. Look at your wrist. That contract didn't need a judge to be validated. It needed your blood. And now, that very blood is the ink sustaining the seal." Silas warned that attempting to leave was not merely a breach of contract, but an act of spiritual suicide. Imagine the Aetherium Grand is an open wound in reality, and you, the gatekeeper, are the only bandage. "That bandage has been stitched into your flesh," he said, his voice carrying the weariness of ages. "If you try to tear it away, if you attempt to step outside the theater's boundaries after your last shift, you will be met with a terrible energetic dissonance. The anti-ritual energy you were selected to absorb will invert, consuming you whole. You won't just lose the job, you will lose cohesion with reality." Silas recounted the former gatekeepers who had tried to escape. One ran 5 blocks before his body was reduced to a terrifying, flayed tableau smeared onto a brick wall, his spirit dragged backward and dissolved into the concrete to reinforce the foundations. Another simply vanished, not dying, but being immediately restructured into a new seat in Screening Room 1, where his consciousness was forced to eternally witness the events on screen. Death is a release the Aetherium refuses to grant those who violate the covenant. You cannot die. You can only assimilate. Silas then shifted to detailing the horrific consequences of intentionally or accidentally breaking the 3 survival covenants. These were not warnings of termination, but descriptions of permanent, personalized damnation. If the new employee fails to prevent the bearer of ticket number 032 from entering the lobby, it is not just a failure of the sealing ritual. It is a structural collapse at the very core. The 032 bearer is a catalyst. When they pass the threshold, the gate instantly dilates. You won't have to deal with the entirety of the residents at once, but you will have to deal with Valerius, Silas warned. If this occurs, The Aetherium Grand would recognize the new staff member's incomplete dedication, and they would instantly become the substitute offering. Their soul would be flayed from their body slowly and excruciatingly, not to become building material like the others, but to serve as Valerius's eternal, tormented audience on his personal stage. They would be forced to experience Valerius's hysteria and death repeated thousands of times, stripped of memory and identity, leaving only pure agony to fuel Screening Room 1. You will become a perpetually looping horror short, screening inside your own mind forever, Silas concluded. The second form of punishment is reserved for carelessness and misplaced compassion. If the living flame dies out, and the employee fails to hermetically seal Screening Room 1, the crystalline entities will breach the psychic barrier. They do not need to kill you, Silas said. They require your mind. The crystalline entities aren't ravenous demons. They are collectors of pure reason. When they flood the auditorium, and you open the door attempting to save the patrons, they will focus on the most intact source of reason, you. The employee would be instantly petrified. Every thought, every memory, every fragment of understanding about the world will be vacuumed clean, leaving an empty shell. This shell will not die. It will be stuck. Valerius will repurpose this husk, turning it into a silent usher, a lifeless background figure programmed to wander the dark halls, collecting the fierce scraps left behind by subsequent audiences. You will continue working, but without will, without conscience, merely an automated ticket-scanning automaton of hell. You will become a material ghost, eternally tethered to the dark hallways. Silas stressed that the third covenant is the most dangerous, for it threatens not only the theater but the outside world. If you touch the sanguine 13th reel, or worse, allow curiosity to guide you into attempting to project it, you will cease to be yourself, Silas whispered, his voice carrying a rare, genuine fear. The real is the raw, concentrated will of Valerius, a spiritual contagion. Touching it instantly inoculates the architect's fanaticism into the mind of the toucher. The employee will not be controlled by Valerius like a puppet, but will become Valerius. They will harbor a singular command, to finish his work. You will step out of the theater, not to escape, but to seek new building materials. You will begin sacrificing your loved ones, your friends, your neighbors. You will be compelled to open the gate on a grander scale, turning this city into Valerius's magnificent cinema. You will lose the ability to feel remorse. Finally, you will offer yourself up to the architecture, not in terror but in maniacal rapture, completing Valerius's oath. Silas stepped back, taking in the new employee from head to toe. The ensuing silence weighed heavier than the building's reinforced concrete. You see, he said, there is no option labeled resignation. There is only absolute service or absolute assimilation. From this moment on, every waking minute is borrowed time. Every time you follow a covenant, you are using your will as a nail to seal the coffin lid shut on the residence. And every time you do that, you become a little less human. He extended his hand, but not for a handshake. He placed his palm flat on the ticket counter. You have been sworn in. You understand the terms. Welcome to the defense force of the Aetherium Grand. We don't pay in currency. We pay in the continued existence of this world. Consider that fair compensation. He managed a slight upturn of his lips, a smile devoid of warmth, containing only the cold acceptance of fate. The schism hour has begun. The curtains are raised. Silas offered his final, brutal, and profound closing remark. He was no longer a mentor. He was the keeper of secrets the new employee was now bound to protect at all costs. Remember this, new caretaker. Never think you are just cleaning up an old movie house. You are not merely working at the theater. He leaned in closer, his gaze piercing. You are already part of the film, and you cannot leave until the final reel concludes. Have a peaceful shift.